I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for November the 5th, 2025. Today and tomorrow, we will be going through the subject of eating meat at an idolater's private home from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So there's going to be a part 1 and a part 2. So just keep that in mind as you watch or listen to this. Likewise, of course, later on, we definitely have some news to go through. The one big event, of course, everyone is having to sort through today is the mayoral election in New York City. Many people are very concerned. And of course, there continues to be fallout from the recent Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes interview. So let's start with our theology roundup. This does, of course, continue in the study we just had Friday and then Monday on 1 Corinthians 8. But here we move the venue in terms of eating meat sacrificed to idols to the private home of a Corinthian idolater. This study is taken from our ministry publication, the Messianic Kosher Helper. You can find it at outreachisraelbookstore.com. It's available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. All right, so let me switch screens really fast, and we'll get into our study. Okay, there we go. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 10, verses 14 to 33. We're going to get through half of this passage today, and then we'll plan to do the other half tomorrow. 1 Corinthians 10, 14 to 33, the theme is eating meat at an idolater's private home. And in the discussion of the kosher dietary laws within the Messianic sphere of influence, while you would think that, okay, understanding some of the specifics of the dietary laws and Leviticus and Deuteronomy and that sort of thing, that would be fought with a lot of controversy, or things like Mark 7, Peter's vision of Acts 10, Romans 14. It's actually this passage which tends to get the least amount of discussion. And it's probably the one passage where Messianics struggle the most, at least in my experience. When we put the Messianic Kosher Helper together originally over 10 years ago, this is the one passage that there was almost nothing from a Messianic perspective communicated about. And the approach of a lot of Messianic people to this has been somewhat cavalier. It's been almost dismissive, whereas what we need to be doing as responsible Bible readers is, of course, take into account as much as we can classify from Holy Scripture what it communicates about eating, kosher, clean and unclean, etc. All right, so this passage is taken from what I have labeled as the Messianic Apologetics Revised Version. This is my edit of the public domain World Messianic Bible. Some of you all remember the Hebrew Names version. That got updated as the World Messianic Bible. It's in the public domain, and you can do derivative projects of this. So this incorporates a number of the conclusions I draw in this study we're about to go through. 1 Corinthians 10, 14 through 33. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise people. Judge what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not a sharing of the blood of Messiah? The bread which we break, is it not a sharing of the body of Messiah? Because there is one bread, we, who are many, are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. Consider Israel according to the flesh. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? Leviticus 7:6 and 15. What am I saying then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but I say that the things which the nations sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God, and I do not want you to be sharers with demons. Deuteronomy 32:17, Psalm 106:37. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and of the table of demons. Malachi 1:7-12. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? Deuteronomy 32:21. Quote, all things are permissible, unquote, but not all things are profitable. Quote, all things are permissible, unquote, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own, but each one his neighbor's good. Eat whatever is being sold in the meat market, asking no questions for the sake of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and its fullness. Psalm 24:1, 50 verse 12. If one of the unbelievers invites you and you want to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no questions for the sake of conscience. But if anyone says to you, this was sacrificed to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you, and for the sake of conscience. Conscience, I say, not your own, but the others. Quote, for why is my liberty judged by another's conscience? For if I partake with thankfulness, why am I judged for something I give thanks for? Unquote. Whether, therefore, you eat or drink, or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense, whether to Jews, to Greeks, or to the assembly of God. Just as I also please everyone in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of the many, that they may be saved. And that is 1 Corinthians 10:14-33. And already from that passage, I am sure that some of you have wondered a little bit. What do we do about this passage if we have a favorable view to the ongoing importance of the kosher dietary laws in the post-resurrection era? So that's what we're going to try to get into today and tomorrow. 1 Corinthians 10:14-33. And 1 Corinthians 10:1-11 preceding, the Apostle Paul issued an important reminder to the Corinthians, specifically how what occurred to the ancient Israelites in the past took place as examples for Messiah followers to consider, with the expressed reason we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. 1 Corinthians 10:6, World Messianic Bible. Paul was clear to direct his audience. Now, all these things happened to them by way of example, and they were written for our admonition, on whom the ends of the ages have come. 1 Corinthians 10:11, World Messianic Bible. Given the fact that much of what the Torah says is to be understood as a warning, Revised Standard Version, so that previous mistakes committed by God's people, like fornication and idolatry, are not subsequently repeated. 1 Corinthians 10:7-9. Paul by no means should be considered as someone opposing the law of Moses here. A major focus of his admonishment to the Corinthians was precisely so they could resist lawlessness, and in particular, the idolatry present in their local community. 1 Corinthians 10:13. Having just appealed directly to the Tanakh or Old Testament, specifically in the example of ancient Israel's worship of the golden calf, 1 Corinthians 10:7, Exodus 32:4, and the Numbers 25 scene of sexual immorality, 1 Corinthians 10:8, Paul moved forward in 1 Corinthians 10:14-33 in addressing something similar to what he had previously addressed in 1 Corinthians 8. In this passage, while the issue of eating meat which had been sacrificed to idols is discussed, the venue has changed to the private home of a non-believer, not a public temple or shrine. Paul intended to appeal to the Corinthians' good sense. 1 Corinthians 10:15, as he addressed a hypothetical situation about what to do when a Corinthian believer might have been invited to dine at the home of a non-believer. 1 Corinthians 10:27, which would presumably be an opportunity to develop a relationship and share of the good news of Israel's Messiah. What specifically was to be done when potentially served meat which had been sacrificed to idols? Due to the repeated presence of the Corinthian slogan, Panta ex estin, or everything is permissible, 1 Corinthians 10:23 from the New International Version, where it appears twice. In this passage, it cannot go overlooked how there are some notable parallels between 1 Corinthians 10:14-33 and 6:18-20 preceding. All right, so we have a table here with, in the left-hand column, our passage, 1 Corinthians 10:14-33, and then in the right-hand column, 1 Corinthians 6:18-20. So let's go through this, and we can see some of the parallels which are present. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. 10:14, World Messianic Bible. Flee sexual immorality. 6:18, World Messianic Bible. The cup of blessing which we bless, isn't it a sharing of the blood of Messiah? The bread which we break, isn't it a sharing of the body of Messiah? Because there is one loaf of bread, we, who are many, are one body, for we all partake of the one loaf of bread. 10:16-17, World Messianic Bible. Don't you know that your bodies are members of Messiah? Shall I then take the members of Messiah and make them members of a prostitute? May it never be. Or don't you know that he who is joined to a prostitute is one body, but he who is joined to the Lord is one spirit? 6:15-17, World Messianic Bible. Quote, all things are lawful for me, unquote, but not all things are profitable. Quote, all things are lawful for me, unquote, but not all things build up. 10:23, World Messianic Bible. Quote, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are expedient. Quote, all things are lawful for me, unquote, but I will not be brought under the power of anything. 6:12, World Messianic Bible. And finally here, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. 10:31, World Messianic Bible. For you were bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. 6:20, World Messianic Bible. Previously, Paul was greatly concerned with presumed Corinthian believers consorting with prostitutes. Here, Paul was concerned with the abuses present among those who thought that I am allowed to do anything. New Living Translation, which would clearly be problematic in light of the imperative of edifying other believers and or those outside of the faith community. While opposing any participation and fellowship in idolatry, 1 Corinthians 10:14-23, what did it mean here to edify one's neighbor? 1 Corinthians 10:24. It could have meant accepting the invitation to the home of a non-believer for a meal, 1 Corinthians 10:25-27a, and in the process, having to eat whatever was served to oneself, 1 Corinthians 10:27b. When it would have been discovered that the meat served had been sacrificed to idols, the meat was to then be refused. 1 Corinthians 10:28-29a. All of the activities conducted by the redeemed in Yeshua are to be to the glory of God and the concern of others who may be offended. 1 Corinthians 10, 31 to 33. 1 Corinthians 10, 14 to 33, and its relationship to both eating and the kosher dietary laws is without a doubt a passage which tends to create a great deal of tension when it is brought up in a messianic venue. Such tension not only concerns the first century Corinthian setting of Paul's writing, but its application for more modern times, particularly in settings of missionary evangelism and or hospitality from others. 1 Corinthians 10, 14 to 33 is a place where a number of Christian theologians think that the Apostle Paul had definitely gone rogue in terms of the apostolic decree, Acts 15, 20, 29, or had at least pushed the limits of prohibitions of the apostolic decree as far to the left as they could go. Obviously, a reasonable examination of 1 Corinthians 10, 14 to 33 should be in order, and with it, an understanding of Paul's overriding concern. I try to accommodate everybody and everything, not looking for my own advantage, but for the advantage of everybody else so that they may be saved. 1 Corinthians 10:33, New Jerusalem Bible. And in this analysis today, we're going to be getting through verse 24. Okay, so just keep that in mind here. Starting with 1 Corinthians 10, 14 through 17. Paul issued the imperative to the Corinthians. Therefore, my dearly loved ones, flee from idolatry. 1 Corinthians 10:14, Tree of Life version. With the scene of Exodus 32, 1 through 6 in view, of ancient Israel's worship of the golden calf. 1 Corinthians 10:7. The Phillips New Testament paraphrase of 1 Corinthians 10:14 is highly useful. The lesson we must learn, my brothers, is at all costs to avoid worshiping a false god. As Paul proceeded to explain the great problem of fellowship with idolatry in 1 Corinthians 10, 16 through 22, he noted that, I speak to sensible people, judge for yourselves what I say. 1 Corinthians 10:15, New International Version. The term phronimos is taken to be in one's right mind, in one's senses, and wise, sensible, prudent, from the Liddell Scott Lexicon. Elsewhere in his correspondence with the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 4:10, 2 Corinthians 11:19, phronimos is used a bit ironically or even mockingly, but that is not at all how it is used in 1 Corinthians 10:15. Craig Blomberg interjects the appropriate thought, notwithstanding their divisions, Paul trusts that common sense will win out in this instance, unquote. The Apostle Paul was very concerned about what various Corinthians had been participating in, referencing how at the Lord's Supper, multiple people partake of the bread and wine. Paul directed them, the cup of blessing that we bless, isn't it a sharing of Messiah's blood? The bread which we break, isn't it a sharing of Messiah's body? 1 Corinthians 10:16, Tree of Life version. A connection with the Last Supper meal between Yeshua and his disciples, Mark 14:23 and 24, Matthew 26:27 and 28, Luke 22:20, and what it represents for those who have received Yeshua into their lives and are in communion with one another as fellow brothers and sisters is significantly highlighted. It has been correctly acknowledged by various examiners that some connection is present in 1 Corinthians 10:16 with the traditional Jewish blessing over the cup. In his commentary, Ben Witherington III describes how Paul quote, refers to the cup of blessing, a technical term for the cup of wine drunk at the end of a Jewish meal and over which the thanksgiving or grace is said. Talmud Sota 38b. In the Passover meal, this was the third cup of the four to be drunk. It was probably the cup Jesus identified as the cup of the new covenant in his blood at the Last Supper. The point is that this new covenant was enacted by Christ's death. Unquote. The traditional blessing over the cup, as recorded in the Mishnah, is, "Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine." Mishnah Barakot 6:1. Today's Messianic people are certainly familiar with the customary refrain, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. There is no uniform agreement in the contemporary Messianic movement about the issue of the Lord's Supper and whether it is to be observed in association with the annual Passover Seder or it is to be something which takes place more regularly. Christian debates are present as to whether or not there is even a Passover context to what is in view. Whether observed annually, monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, or even daily, as is witnessed across diverse Christian traditions to be sure, Paul's major point concerned what the participation of believers in memorializing the bread and wine of the Last Supper meal signified. Those who participate in the Lord's Supper or bread and wine participate in remembering his sacrificial death and atonement, and subsequently also his attendant resurrection. The term koinonia is critical as it involves communion, association, partnership, fellowship. Liddell Scott, reflected in a variety of English versions as sharing, New American Standard, New Revised Standard, participation, Revised Standard, English Standard Version, New International Version, fellowship, Young's Literal Translation, or even communion, American Standard Version. The gravity of participation of believers in the body and blood of Yeshua is expressed in Paul's word of Philippians 3:10, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, becoming conformed to his death. World Messianic Bible. The intention of Paul's statement is quite apparent. If believers participate in fellowship one to another in covenant relationship with Yeshua the Messiah, then they have no business doing the same with idols. 1 Corinthians 10:21. As David Pryor directs, quote, the central ceremony of Christian, Jewish, and pagan worship is more than mere words and actions. Those who take part in these ceremonies become actual partners. The partnership acts in two ways, with one another as fellow worshipers and with the God whom they worship. The worshipers share together in the spiritual reality behind all that happens. Unquote. In a way, in directing the Corinthians to consider koinonia, Paul had co-opted some ancient pagan concepts. David E. Garland makes note of the words of Aelius Aristides, a 2nd century CE Greek orator, who said of the god Seraphis, men share in a special way the truest communion in the sacrifices to this god alone, as they invite him to the altar and appoint him as guest and host. In his estimation, quote, Paul is leading his readers to see that they can never eat idol food as neutral participants, just as they cannot partake of the Lord's Supper as detached observers. Partaking of anything offered to a deity makes them accessories to the sacrificial act and creates solidarity with the honored deity. Unquote. Approaching the Lord's Supper improperly was something witnessed by many of the Corinthians. For this cause many among you are weak and sickly, and not a few sleep. 1 Corinthians 10:30, World Messianic Bible. 1 Corinthians 10:17. The participation and interconnectivity of believers to one another and with the Lord was emphasized by Paul in his detailing of the bread. Because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for all of us share that one bread. 1 Corinthians 10:17, Holman Christian Standard Bible. Certainly to be considered would be Yeshua as the bread of life, John 6:33-58. And Paul would discuss further in his letter what he intended by the redeemed composing the body of Messiah, 1 Corinthians 12:14-27. The analogy of believers composing the body of Messiah has the dual advantage of Paul's audience considering what Yeshua endured on their behalf in being sacrificed for human sin, as well as what they were to be doing as beneficiaries of his salvation. Gordon D. Fee indicates, quote, by common participation in the single loaf, the body of Christ, they affirm that they together make up the body of Christ, which in turn implies that they may not likewise become partakers in similar associations that honor demons, unquote. It is also to be remembered how the thrust of Exodus 12:43-48 is that commemoration of the Passover was to be a community affair. And whether the Lord's Supper is remembered annually at the Seder or more frequently, it too is a community affair, as brothers and sisters in the Messiah are all in it together, so to speak. The interconnectivity, though, of believers to one another and believers with the Messiah is something which can swing the other way if people are disloyal to the Lord. Roy E. Ciampa and Brian S. Rosner usefully explain, quote, if all those who eat the bread together in the assembly are thereby made into one body, presumably all those who share food or drink which is associated with a pagan idol become one together through their joint sharing of that food, unquote. First Corinthians 10:18. Before describing the dangers of sharing in the table of an idol, 1 Corinthians 10:19-22, Paul made a comparison with the tabernacle and temple system seen in the history of ancient Israel, saying, observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? 1 Corinthians 10:18, New King James. As sacrifices were offered at the tabernacle or temple, a portion of the meat was available to be eaten by the Levitical priests mainly, but also others who would be in attendance as well. Leviticus 7:15, 8:31, Deuteronomy 12:17-18, 14:23-26. Whether the priests specifically or other Israelites in attendance, those in the community of ancient Israel were in fellowship with Israel's God and were very clearly benefiting from his grace, his goodness, and his blessing of them. Such a perspective of the sacrificial system is reflected in the works of the first century figures Philo and Josephus. Because it is fitting that the sacrifices should not be stored up for food, but should be openly exposed, so as to afford a meal to all who are in need of it. For the sacrifice, when once placed on the altar, is no longer the property of the person who has offered it, but belongs to that being to whom the victim is sacrificed, who, being a beneficent and bounteous God, makes the whole company of those who offer the sacrifice partakers at the altar and messmates, only admonishing them not to look upon it as their own feast, for they are but stewards of the feast. Philo, Special Laws 1, 221. When we offer sacrifices to him, we do it not in order to surfeit ourselves or to be drunken, for such excesses are against the will of God, and would be an occasion of injuries and of luxury, but by keeping ourselves sober, orderly, and ready for our other occupations, and being more temperate than others, and for our duty at the sacrifices themselves, We ought, in the first place, to pray for the common welfare of all, and after that for our own. For we are made for fellowship one with another, and he who prefers the common good before what is peculiar to himself is above all acceptable to God. Josephus against Appian 2, 195, 196. What would it mean for those who should be loyal to Israel's God, who via their participation in the Lord's Supper can fellowship with him quantitatively indifferent from the ancient Israelites at the tabernacle or temple to fellowship with pagan gods and goddesses and their public sacrifices? There is certainly a difference of approach for 1 Corinthians 10:18 and how to view what Paul labeled Ton Israel Kata Sarka, rendered by the New American Standard as the nation Israel. But what is more literally something like Israel according to the flesh, Green's literal version. Some look at it as an antithesis of flesh versus spirit, intended, as Marion Swords thinks. Quote, Paul is pointing here to the theologically correct practices of Israel in the context of the world, the present evil age independent of the Christ event. Unquote. Others approaching Israel according to the flesh more from a perspective of replacement theology than not look to this group being contrasted to the so-called church as a spiritual Israel, making reference to Romans 8:5 and Kata Sarka, or according to the flesh. Garland thinks that, quote, the example that Paul has in mind is wilderness Israel, whose sinful example 10, 1 through 11 serves as a warning to all, unquote. And actually thinks that idolatrous sacrifices and the eating and drinking of Exodus 32, 5 and 6 are what was being referenced. Noting some of the controversy across the evangelical Protestant spectrum at least, Fee directs readers, quote, one thing is certain, he intends to refer to the sacrificial meals in ancient Israel, unquote. The Revised English Bible probably goes a little too far in paraphrasing Ton Israel Kata Sarka with consider Jewish practice. Messianic versions like the Complete Jewish Bible and Tree of Life version have physical Israel. The Kingdom New Testament has ethnic Israel. Yet, if any paraphrase should be considered, it should probably just be the relatively neutral ancient Israel. For first century purposes, Ton Israel Kata Sarka constituted the known physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish people. Ultimately, for a figure like the Apostle Paul, Ton Israel Kata Sarka, or Israel according to the flesh, is not as important as those who constitute the commonwealth of Israel, Ephesians 2:11 through 13, the Israel of God, Galatians 6:16, who are grafted in as either wild or natural branches to Israel's olive tree, Romans 11:16 through 24. Membership in a restored kingdom of Israel, ruled by Messiah Yeshua, is imperative and must come ultimately via a transformed heart. Membership in the Messianic kingdom, while most imperatively needed for the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is also very much intended for the nations of the world as well. 1 Corinthians 10:19. Paul directed his audience, what am I saying then? That an idol sacrifice is anything, or that an idol is anything? 1 Corinthians 10:19, Tree of Life version. Previously, Paul had to address the Corinthian slogan or slogans. Hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that, quote, an idol has no real existence, unquote, and that, quote, there is no God but one, unquote. 1 Corinthians 8:4, Revised Standard Version. The one God of Israel, manifested in the Father as God and the Son as Lord, 1 Corinthians 8, 5 and 6, also Deuteronomy 6, 4, is supreme. Paul was not in agreement how idols are vain nothings, as the Tanakh affirms. Paul wasn't, okay. That did not mean, however, that even though idols were vain nothings, that they did not bear some significance to those who would worship them or who would eat of the sacrifices made to them. The people who would have participated in the animal sacrifices of the temple in Jerusalem, 1 Corinthians 10:18, were persons who participated in useful, edifying exercises intending to honor the one God of creation in some way. What of those who participated in sacrifices made to idols? While an idol may be of gold, silver, stone, or wood, there is a definite spiritual presence which sits behind an idol, and those who participate in its veneration associate themselves with satanic demons. These observations are quite accurate. Quote, an idol has no reality in the sense that an idol does not in fact represent what might truly be called a god. But what the Corinthians have failed to discern right along is that to say an idol is not a god does not mean that it does not represent supernatural powers. Indeed, it is quite the opposite, unquote. 1 Corinthians 10:20. Paul testified that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become sharers in demons. 1 Corinthians 10:20, New American Standard. 1 Corinthians 10:20 actually includes a Greek textual variant of importance, as the canonical ha thuousin daimonios kai ou theo thuousin actually reads that what they sacrifice to demons and not to God. Holman Christian Standard Bible. Most modern Bibles, Revised Standard Version, New American Standard, New Revised Standard, English Standard Version, Complete Jewish Bible, Tree of Life Version, follow the textual variant ha thuousin ta ethne, an ancient gloss intended to clarify that the sacrifices of the Jerusalem temple were not somehow being referred to, 1 Corinthians 10:18. Still, there is discussion as to whether this variant is appropriate, as Philip W. Comfort summarizes in his New Testament Text and Translation Commentary. Quote, the difference among the variants pertains to the inclusion or exclusion of ta ethne, the Gentiles / the pagans. Most likely it was added to clarify that it was not Israel that Paul was speaking about, 10:18, but that he has shifted to a new subject, the Gentiles. Had ta ethne, the Gentiles, been original, there is no good reason why it would have been deleted. Most English versions reflect the variant because they add the subject for the sake of clarity, unquote. From his New Testament Text and Translation Commentary. While there are many who prefer the reading that what the pagans sacrifice, there are various examiners who see no need for this gloss in a modern translation and instead think that Deuteronomy 32:17 was being quoted. They sacrificed to demons, not to God, to gods that they didn't know, to new gods that came up recently, which your fathers didn't dread. World Messianic Bible. In the translation offered in his commentary, Thistleton renders 1 Corinthians 10:20 as, not that, but when they sacrifice, quote, they offer sacrifices to demons and not to God, unquote. 1 Corinthians 10:20, New International Greek Testament Commentary. Separating out Deuteronomy 32:17 as a quote. The challenge, of course, is how Deuteronomy 32:17 does notably speak of Israel in rebellion against the Lord, and not the pagans or nations at large worshiping and sacrificing to idols and the demonic powers behind them. There are others, such as Ciampa and Rosner, who see the gloss as, quote, an accurate interpretation of Paul's meaning, unquote. And Messianic versions like the Complete Jewish Bible and Tree of Life version read concurrent with this. No, what I'm saying is that the things which pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice not to God but to demons, and I don't want you to become sharers of demons. 1 Corinthians 10:20, Complete Jewish Bible. No, I'm saying that what the pagan sacrifices to demons and not to God, and I don't want you to become partners with demons. 1 Corinthians 10:20, Tree of Life version. Paul was very concerned that the Corinthians never become koinonous ton daimonion, participants with demons, New International Version, or partakers with devils, Wesley New Testament. Much of the result of participating in idolatry would be seen in his later correspondence, as he would emote, in whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, that the light of the good news of the glory of Messiah, who is the image of God, should not dawn on them. 2 Corinthians 4:4, World Messianic Bible. More immediate to be considered would be how Paul had just addressed how those who joined in sexual intercourse with a prostitute would be joined to a prostitute. 1 Corinthians 6:15-17. And those who tried to share their spiritual actions with both the God of Israel and other gods, goddesses, demons, were committing infidelity against him. Certainly there are scenes to be considered from ancient Israel where participating in idolatry and feasting involved dark spiritual powers and enraged the Lord against his own. Deuteronomy 32:16-21, Psalm 106:28, also Baruch 4:7, Revelation 9:20. 1 Corinthians 10:21 and 22. The Apostle Paul was insistent about the loyalty of the Corinthians to the one true God in the strong assertion, you can't both drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You can't both partake of the table of the Lord and of the table of demons. 1 Corinthians 10:21, World Messianic Bible. As there can be no participation in open idolatry at a temple or shrine, such as was previously addressed in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. The Message paraphrase of 1 Corinthians 10:21 is actually fairly appropriate. You can't have it both ways, banqueting with the master one day and slumming with demons the next. The Apostolic Decree, Acts 15:20-29, forbade the new non-Jewish believers from participating in idolatrous activities, and the Apostle Paul had just told the Corinthians why it was unacceptable. He referenced the infamous scene of the golden calf, 1 Corinthians 10:7, also Exodus 32:4, as well as the Numbers 25 encounter of the Moabite prostitutes brought in by Balaam and consequent slaughter of the offenders, 1 Corinthians 10:8. The blight upon much of Greco-Roman paganism was worship of idols associated with gross sexual immorality. While some of the Corinthian quote-unquote believers were, most unfortunately, involving themselves in these activities, others had probably just looked at them from a distance, perhaps feeling a pull from various family members and friends who did not recognize Yeshua. The thrust of the Apostolic Decree was that the new non-Jewish believers did not have to have the Torah's instruction forced upon them. It was rather to see them severed from their old spheres of pagan social and religious influence, hence making them attached to a new social and religious community where Moses' teaching was being declared every week. Acts 15:21. Yet, as Acts 18 testifies, the Messiah followers in Corinth were driven out of the Corinthian synagogue, and this certainly affected what they thought they could and could not do. Could they be involved in some extra God of Israel activities, at least from time to time? Hence, Paul would have to address the Corinthian slogan, all things are permitted yet again. 1 Corinthians 10:23. When those who profess exclusive loyalty to the one true God begin to demonstrate anything but this, all they can do is provoke him to anger. Specifically, Paul inquired, or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We are not stronger than he, are we? 1 Corinthians 10:22, Tree of Life version. As is witnessed throughout the record of the Tanakh, the jealousy of the Lord toward his own was frequently aroused by idolatry committed against him. Exodus 20, verse 5, 34:14, Deuteronomy 4:24, 5:9, 6:14 and 15, Joshua 24:19 and 20, 1 Kings 14:22 and 23, Ezekiel 8:3, Nahum 1:2, Zephaniah 1:18, Psalm 78:58. This was very serious for Paul. Are we trying to arouse the Lord's jealousy? Are we stronger than he? New International Version. Of course, limited human mortals are not stronger than the Creator, and if they are unfaithful toward him, then severe consequences will ensue. Pryor astutely observes, quote, Paul clearly believes in the reality of an unseen spirit world, that idolatry is not just meaningless, but positively evil. It is evil because it robs the true God of the glory due to him. And because of such actions, bring people not simply into contact with lower spiritual powers, but actually into subjection to them, unquote. Certainly, the importance of the Lord being a jealous God from the Tanakh and the Corinthians avoiding the mistakes of those in ancient Israel was present in Paul's remarks. The exclusive loyalty which Messiah followers were to demonstrate to the God of Israel, and how vital this was in light of the surrounding Greco-Roman polytheism, has to be recognized. Richard B. Hayes' summary on how subversive the Jewish people and later the followers of Israel's Messiah were to the paganism surrounding them is important to consider. Quote, here, the radically exclusive character of Israel's monotheistic faith becomes clear. In the ancient Mediterranean world, it was thoroughly commonplace to worship various gods and goddesses. Participating in cultic rites for one deity did not by any means preclude participating with equal piety and rites for another. The pantheon was infinitely inclusive. Indeed, it was probably a good bet to worship several gods as a way of diversifying one's spiritual investments. The God of Israel, however, would tolerate none of this. Jews and later Christians puzzled and outraged their pagan neighbors by refusing, even for the sake of appearances, to venerate any god but one. The knowing Corinthians were seeking to work out some sort of sensible compromise on this matter, but Paul would have none of it, unquote. And we'll be closing now with 1 Corinthians 10, 23 and 24. 1 Corinthians 10:23 repeats the slogan, everything is permissible, New International Version, or Panta ex estine, which Paul had refuted earlier in 1 Corinthians 6:11, chastising various Corinthians for thinking that they could get away with certain sinful activities, which he had said was something not at all profitable or useful. Later on in this letter, more had to be communicated, and it surely behooves a responsible Bible reader to view 1 Corinthians 10:23 in light of the wider co-text of 1 Corinthians 10. The errant Corinthian slogan, Panta ex estine, or everything is permitted, Tree of Life version, could very well have been a statement hijacked from Paul's teaching to them, where he could have taught something like, many things are permitted. What Paul would further address in 1 Corinthians 10, 25 to 33, involved a hypothetical invitation to the home of a non-believer to share a meal, which would serve as an explanation regarding the responsible usage of a born-again believer's freedom or liberty. in the edification of another. To a figure like the Apostle Paul, many things are indeed permitted, which would have gone against various facets of his contemporary Jewish upbringing, or even various halakhic norms, but things permitted in light of the overwhelmingly overriding nature of the good news. As Leon Morris puts it, quote, Christian liberty is important, but there are some things that are not wise. They neither build the believer up in the faith nor help other people. It is more important to avoid such actions than to assert one's rights. Unquote. The slogan, Panta ex estin, or We are free to do anything, New English Bible, once again had to be responded to by Paul, and could certainly have affected the thinking of many, as the lure of one's previous lifestyle and paganism was still present, as he countered this statement in 1 Corinthians 10:23, New International Version. And there's a table here, the left-hand column, the Corinthians talking, the right-hand column, the Apostle Paul talking. The Corinthians, everything is permissible, Paul, but not everything is beneficial. The Corinthians, everything is permissible, Paul, but not everything is constructive. While Paul had just upheld the authority of Israel's scriptures for the instruction of born-again believers, 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through 13, referencing examples of idolatry and sexual immorality, he still had to refute what various Corinthians had been saying. The statement of 1 Corinthians 10:23a is practically identical to what was asserted earlier in 1 Corinthians 6:12a, with Paul's response being, all ou panta sum fere, but not all things are helpful, Revised Standard Version. Repeating the slogan in 1 Corinthians 10:23b, Paul responded to everything is permissible, New International Version, with ou panta oikadome, but not all things edify, New American Standard. In the second response, the verb oikadomeo is employed mainly pertaining to construct in a transcendent sense, or to help improve ability to function and living responsibly and effectively, strengthen, build up, make more able, from the BDAG lexicon. It should also key Messianic examiners into Yeshua's mission of coming to restore Israel, Matthew 16:18, also Jeremiah 33:7, Septuagint. But as Thistleton indicates, quote, building up presupposes the logical grammar of building the community, unquote. The edification of the faith community is a theme witnessed throughout Paul's letters. 1 Corinthians 14, 3-5, 12, 17, 26, Romans 14, 19, 15, 2, 2 Corinthians 12, 19, 13, 10, 1 Thessalonians 5, 11. The Corinthians had been saying everything is permissible, New International Version, but it is quite obvious how not all things are at all edifying or constructive, New International Version, for the body of Messiah and its mission in the earth. As Garland describes, quote, Paul's command that one not seek that which is his own leaves indefinite what they are not to seek. We can fill in the blank with words such as advantage, interest, good, ends, enjoyment, needs, unquote. When people think that they are free to do whatever they want, as these Corinthians were, challenging such views frequently has to be done on logical grounds and not just spiritual grounds. Paul did not agree that everything is permissible, 1 Corinthians 10:23, New International Version, because most frequently what people think that they can get away with will be to the detriment of the body of Messiah. Paul was quick to assert, do not seek your own advantage, but that of the other. 1 Corinthians 10:24, New Revised Standard. A definite application of the Torah's requirement to love neighbor, Leviticus 19:18. Did the Corinthians' behavior help the body of Messiah and its purposes, much less outsiders to the faith who needed to see the power of the one God of Israel operating through them. Witherington's comments are useful to consider here. Quote, Paul once again reports the Corinthians' inevitable response to his argument. Everything is permitted, verse 23. But not everything is useful or profitable or builds up the body of Christ. And in a deliberative argument, it is critical to stress what is beneficial or advantageous. The Christian is one who does not seek his or her own advantage, but rather that of others. Unquote. And we're going to close up our study there. So tomorrow it's our plan to finish up with 1 Corinthians 10, 25, all the way to 33. Yes. So I know that we went into a lot of detail there, but we have to understand the setting of what Paul will later talk about as it involves sharing a meal in an idolater's private home. And how often do you hear that discussed in today's Messianic community in dialogues about kosher, etc.? Probably not that many. All right, so let me switch windows really quickly, and we'll then get into some news. All right, and once again, this has been taken from our ministry publication, the Messianic Kosher Helper. All right, so the news. And of course, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is time sensitive. It changes from day to day. All of the stories I'm about to go through, you'll be able to see these listed when this episode is archived later today on MessianicApologetics.net. So you can read the articles, watch the different clips, etc. All right, so number one, we are reminded that we need to be continuing to pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, especially the Messianic Jewish community in Israel. Number two, we need to be praying for peace, Russia, Ukraine. And then number three, we got to be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front, because I'm sure many of you were watching some of the election yesterday, particularly with the New York mayoral election. Zoran Mamdani is the mayor-elect of New York now, and many consider the past week, going back to the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes interview, that this has been a bad week for America, and we've got to be really paying attention as God's people and as believers, especially those of us who maintain that God is not finished with the ethnic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they were gathered back to the Holy Land in fulfillment of Isaiah 66:8, that we have witnessed the rise of the Messianic Jewish community, the Messianic Jewish revival, and it's something which is eventually going to culminate in the return of Yeshua to planet Earth. Those of us who believe that, whether we're going to be labeled Zionists or Christian Zionists, we need to be paying attention to what is occurring right now. And if you're not stirred up, if you're not greatly disappointed in a lot of what you see, not just on the left, but even on the right, then start paying attention. And one of the reasons we've gone 5 times a week with Messianic Insider is so that we can keep you up to speed on these things which your local Messianic congregational rabbi, leader, etc. might not always do. Some truly are just hoping this is all going to blow over, or if it gets bad enough, the rapture will come and take us out of here. I don't believe either one of those things is going to happen. What I do believe is going to happen is that in the coming years, I'm not going to put a timetable on it, Messianic Jewish believers in the diaspora are going to have to start making the difficult choice. Do we stay here, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the United Kingdom, France, Canada, Australia, wherever it is, they're going to have to make the very difficult decision. Do I stay here or do I make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael? That's going to be the really difficult decision many are going to have to start making. Okay, so let's get into these stories. Starting with yesterday, open source intel. This is forwarded along. The time is 11:45, but it came up in my feed after yesterday's episode. At this hour, obviously it's stated, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz are leading a high-level security meeting focused on authorizing the next phases of escalation against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Okay, so while the crisis in Gaza has been dying down a little bit, what about Lebanon? What about the Houthis? What about some of these other areas? What about Iran again? So the tensions in the Middle East are by no means over. And yeah, the Israeli government's got very difficult decisions to make. Okay, we're going to shift over to Russia, Ukraine now. Also open source intel. This is from yesterday. Ukraine is on a path to EU membership, Zelensky says, noting the country is ready to open the first 3 negotiation clusters and calling on the EU to remove all obstacles. Okay, now one of the things that I do want to indicate is different. EU membership, and of course the EU, yes, it has military alliances, but it's much more political and economic. EU membership to the Russian Federation is not as bad as NATO membership. I mean, it's bad, but it's not as bad as NATO membership. And not all members of the EU are members of NATO. Ireland's not a member of NATO. Austria is not a member of NATO. So, of course, we know this is the kind of thing which can change at a moment's notice, but we do have to keep tabs on the Russia-Ukraine front. All right, to the New York mayoral election. This is from Instagram, the Jerusalem Post, yesterday, November the 4th. Trump, Jews who vote for Mamdani are stupid people. Trump calls Jewish voters for Mamdani stupid. U.S. President Donald Trump declared on Truth Social that any Jewish person voting for New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani is stupid, calling the New York Assemblyman a proven and self-professed Jew hater. Trump endorsed independent Andrew Cuomo instead, warning he won't send federal funds to New York City if Mamdani wins. Okay, and we know now that Mamdani has won. And yes, there are many Jewish people who have voted for him and they support him. And there are many others who did not vote for him. Okay, here's one from The Rift. This came across my social media feed on Instagram, and you can watch this in its entirety. And it accuses someone who is a self-professed Christian Zionist of being a fake Christian. And the commentary here is, send this to your favorite evangelical or Fox News boomer. So, what are we supposed to do about the rising tide on the conservative right or the far right against Christian people who support Israel, the Jewish people's right to return home to the Holy Land, and they believe that Judaism and Christianity have a special relationship? Well, this is not the only post that you're going to see on social media about this, and there's certainly more to come. But what this post basically claims is that Judaism came after Christianity. Rabbinical Judaism is a response to Christianity and to keep Jews from believing in Jesus as Messiah. Of course, I would take them to Galatians 1 and 2, where Paul did in fact testify to my previous behavior in Judaism. So some form of Judaism was in existence contemporary to the time of Yeshua and the apostles. And for certain, after the destruction of the Second Temple, the founding of rabbinical Judaism with the Pharisees who survived, the development formally of the oral tradition, the Mishnah, the Talmud, etc. That occurred simultaneously to the development of emerging Christianity, post-apostolic Christianity, and how much overlap was there with post-Second Temple Judaism as well as Second Temple Judaism, that is debated among scholars. But what is disingenuous is to think that Christianity didn't develop as well and Judaism didn't develop as well. They both did, and that's something recognized by scholars. And of course, it's debated, especially when you get into tools like, for example, the Jewish annotated New Testament. How much of that post-Second Temple Judaism literature, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, that would have been more Second Temple, but Mishnah, Talmud, etc., how many of it paralleled what you see in the apostolic writings or New Testament? Was it in response to the Messiah followers? Did a lot of those ideas exist at the same time as Yeshua performed his ministry and subsequently the apostles? That's academically debated. But the accusation is going to be made that if you are a Christian person, a true follower of Jesus, Judaism and Christianity, two separate independent religions, they don't worship the same God. You're going to start seeing that in greater concentration from those on the conservative right. And today's Messianic movement better start paying attention. And it's not comfortable. It's very upsetting. We're not in the 1980s and 1990s anymore. We are now in a very new time. We're at a time post October the 7th, 2023, the Israel-Gaza war. And rather than see more and more people rally around Israel, around the Jewish people, we're seeing the exact opposite. And I don't particularly know how ready today's Messianic community is for it. All right, Russia, Ukraine. This is from Visegrad 24. This is from yesterday afternoon, November the 4th. Putin praises creators of weapons of mass destruction while claiming Russia threatens no one and seeks friendship. Putin delivered a speech at the award ceremony for the developers of the Berevstechnik, I mispronounced that, I apologize, intercontinental cruise missile and the Poseidon underwater vehicle, which carries nuclear weapons. And here you see a list of Russia's developing more advanced weapons. Yeah, this isn't good. This falls into wars and rumors of wars. The end is not yet. All right, here's a very sad story. You probably are aware of this by now. This is open source Intel Defender, but it's circulated on many platforms. 28-second clip here. Video footage shows a massive fireball the length of several football fields reaching hundreds of feet into the sky immediately following the crash of a McDonnell Douglas MD-11 cargo plane operated by UPS Airlines during takeoff earlier at Muhammad Ali International Airport in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, I'm, of course, a native of the state of Kentucky. I have flown in and out of the Louisville airport before, not recently. And even though I'm from greater Cincinnati, sometimes flying in and out of Louisville was a better deal. But we always drive past the Louisville airport, either going to or coming home from the Messiah Conference. So I know exactly what that airport looks like. It's the main UPS air cargo hub. And yeah, our condolences and thoughts and prayers go out to all of the families of those who perished. But note the aircraft. It was an MD-11, which has ceased being a passenger aircraft a very long time ago. All right, so here's one which got a lot of blowback on social media. This is Brett Cooper. There's a 54-second clip. She was responding to the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes interview. Now, the commentary here from the X channel Awesome Jew is Candace Owens' low IQ sidekick, I'm Brett Cooper, a washed-up, failed third-rate, third-strap political commentator, has officially outed herself as a Jew hater. She's now defending Nick Fuentes and throwing a tantrum because Ted Cruz called him a little Nazi. Yeah, a lot of people, of course, have come to Nick Fuentes' defense, and I'm seeing more and more videos by Nick Fuentes on my X, on Instagram. Brett Cooper, whether you like her or not, says, why are you calling him a Nazi? Well, there are plenty of posts from Nick Fuentes where he has come out as somebody who likes Hitler. He's a fan of Hitler, Team Hitler. If you support Hitler, you're a Nazi. And indeed, there is a huge problem manifesting itself now, particularly with various millennials, Generation Z on the conservative side, with this fascination of things which make people like me very upset, very angry. And of course, it all focuses on the Jews, and they've got too much influence, and we've got to do something about the Jews here in America. And yes, people who are making comparisons with 1930s Germany are very correct. It's very valid to do so. All right. So our next story, this came across my Instagram feed. I'm just passing this on to you. I do not believe it. But here you see the commentator compare the appearance of Solomon's Temple to the new White House ballroom, which is being constructed right now. So you can watch that in its entirety. I don't know where people come up with that kind of crap. I mean, really. I mean, yes, I've got questions about, what's the purpose? I mean, I understand the purpose of a White House ballroom, and I understand it's being privately funded, but, and I understand Trump is wanting to make his mark on the White House like other presidents have before, but having it over the top, overlaid with gold, when Trump's golden age it's a bunch of hokum right now, more than anything else. The Trump presidency, pragmatically, is here to make sure that people like you and me, believers in Israel's Messiah, have a line extension of time to do important work where we can take advantage of things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, which is one day going to close. Whether it's the left that closes it on us or it's the woke right now which closes it on us. Yeah, I don't know why people would compare the ballroom to the Third Temple. And of course, they're trying to make the comparison that Trump is possibly the beast, the anti-Messiah, and he's going to help the Jews, or someone in his sphere of influence is going to help the Jews rebuild the Third Temple, and we're going to enter into the tribulation. I think that's making a comparison which is not there. All right, now here, we do need to pay attention to this. Orthodox Jews, of course, that's not all Orthodox Jews in New York City, are voting for Zohran Mamdani because they believe he is speaking out against Israeli war crimes. And there you have a 2-minute, 39-second clip. They claim Zionists have hijacked their religion to decide what is anti-Semitic and what's not. Now, not all Jews, although more Jews than not are Zionists. They support return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land. But yes, there are these small Orthodox sects that know only the Messiah can come on the scene and gather the Jewish people back to the Holy Land. So because of that, they oppose the Zionists, and they believe that Zionism is hijacked Jewish religion. It's a human action rather than a divine action. And yeah, they're going to support people like Mamdani, and people who don't like Jews are going to, or don't like Jewish Zionists, they're going to say, hey, not even all Jews believe that the state of Israel is legitimate. So how do we navigate around this as Messianic people? In all my time in the Messianic community, haven't really heard people talk about this sector of the Jewish community because it admittedly can be a bit embarrassing. All right, the discussion of Israel, of course, is very high right now. CBN Israel, here's a useful thing to peruse, which came across my Instagram feed. There's a school of thought within the Christian church claiming that God's promises for Israel are no longer valid. It is called replacement theology. So, a response to replacement theology in the church, God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, unconditional. And yes, that is what we're going to be dealing with more and more now that not necessarily those on the left, but because of those on the right. All right, here's something that's very, very disturbing. A Messianic Jewish friend of mine forwarded this, not this specific story, but forwarded this to me a few days ago in what took place during the Halloween holiday. Pennsylvania town apologizes after Halloween parade features Auschwitz gate replica. So here you have Halloween display and then Arbeit macht frei. That means work makes free. Hanover's, that's Hanover, Pennsylvania, St. Joseph Catholic School draws outrage after a float displayed the Nazi slogan Arbeit macht frei. The diocese, church, and creator all issue apologies as Jewish groups condemn the incident and call for renewed Holocaust education. Okay, so yes, it was part of a Halloween display, but you're displaying the gate to Auschwitz, one of the major concentration camps. Why? And yeah, this is happening here in the United States of America in the year 2025. All right, so speaking of, okay. All right, so here is one of the responses to the New York mayoral election. This is from the New York Post. The red apple, and there you see Zohran Mamdani holding up a hammer and sickle. Tomorrow's cover, so this would be today, far-left Democrat Zohran Mamdani has won New York City's mayoral race. He will be the Big Apple's first Muslim and first socialist mayor, as well as one of the youngest. And indeed, there are a lot of people who are wondering what's going to come of this. Yes, what is it going to do to the Jewish community in... What's it going to do to the Jewish community in New York? What's going to happen in the business world, the business community? How is this going to affect politics, of course, across definitely the Northeast, but the United States as a whole? We are not living in the 1980s and 1990s anymore by any means at all. Okay, we got 4 more stories to go through. This is a very useful one to watch, listen to from Olivier Melnick. He works for Chosen People Ministries, is originally from France. He's a Messianic Jewish believer. Many of you all know who he is. We've had him speak locally at our congregation a number of years ago. But he talks about the Nick Fuentes Tucker Carlson interview. Basically, have you heard about this? He's raising awareness because, you know, there are a lot of Messianic congregations. They don't want to talk about this. They don't want to touch this issue. They want it to go away. Whereas he is mentioning, hey, this is going to affect us. What are we going to do about it? So I definitely commend him. All right, here's a very useful clip to watch. It's 1 minute, 29 seconds. It was on Fox Business. That's Stephen Moore. That's Stuart Varney, where Stephen Moore concludes, it's starting to feel like 1975 all over again in New York City. If Zohran Mamdani wins, this is his commentary, the exodus of talent and capital will accelerate, and Wall Street may soon find a new home in Dallas. So that really caught my eye. New York has already lost $500 billion in income over the last decade. High taxes and overregulation have consequences. So while We still wait to see what's going to happen from Mayor-elect Mamdani. He's got to get into office. He's got to get his agenda in place. Yes, many people, Jewish people, other people in New York are probably going to think about leaving, going to other states, Florida as well as Texas being among them. What about the business community? Are they going to stay in New York? So it's going to be more than just the social effects. There's going to be economic effects to this as well. All right, so here's a very important clip which came across my Instagram feed last night. This is from Lizzie Savetsky. She is an American Jewish person. She comments that with the Jewish future feeling more and more uncertain in America, I can't help but think about this week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha, when God says to Avraham, go forth to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. This is from 5 days ago, but it's important. The Jewish people in the land of Israel were created in one breath by God. We have always been inseparable. So she says, my anxiety surrounding Tuesday's New York City mayor election and the potential catastrophic aftermath on the horizon for Jews in America is comforted in knowing that God gave us a home thousands of years ago, our eternal homeland of Israel. So she is raising the awareness, and she's not going to be the only one in the coming days, that, look, the largest Jewish community outside of the land of Israel, certainly outside of Tel Aviv, it's in New York. New York is now, we know for certain, elected Zoran Mamdani as mayor. How is this going to affect the Jewish community? Are people going to leave? Obviously, if they're American Jews, they can easily go to a place like South Florida. They can easily go other places in America. But ultimately, how many are going to be stirred to return home to the land of Israel? And I'm sure that, while that is, a safety net in the minds of many American Jews, it's also like our life here in the land of the free and home of the brave could be over. And living in Israel, while it's the eternal homeland of the people of Israel, the Jewish people, it's not an easy place to live in by any means. It's expensive. You've got hostile enemies all around, but you are there with your own kind. And indeed, while many of us in the Messianic community who are non-Jewish, we can't contemplate moving to Israel. That's not our ancestral homeland. We've got to be here in a place like the United States, operate smartly, pray for the Lord's supernatural protection. But what some of these things do indicate is that it's not going to be life as normal anymore. Things are going to be different. And, for our family, we've been having to walk that for actually 33 years now. When my father passed away on September the 1st, 1992, that changed the dynamics of the McKee family forever. When my mother got remarried, when we entered into the Messianic community 30 years ago, that changed the dynamics very much so. And I knew, as my father's successor, when I entered into college and I was seeing what was taking place in the Messianic community when I was in college, that, there's a good possibility, if I stay in this Messianic movement because of all of its growing pains and whatnot, this family line might very well end with me. So these kinds of moments in our history, our contemporary history, the new mayor of New York, it's a reason for us to stop and pause and think about what we should be doing with our lives, focusing on eternal matters, getting coupled into God's plan of salvation history, and not just doing what Yeshua warned about in Matthew 24 and 25, eating, marrying, giving in marriage, building, and all of this. Because sooner or later, we're going to be involved in endgame. I don't want to be presumptuous as to when that could be, but when endgame hits, we better be psychologically ready and not look at all of the material temptations of the world as entitlements. And yes, that can even involve things as basic as marriage, family, and children. All right. And this is a final post. This is from Instagram. As I said, I have been getting a lot of things coming across my feed, whether it's Instagram, X, etc., from Nick Fuentes. And yes, this is offensive, but you need to at least watch it. There's a lot of profanity in it. The title of it is, "It Will Be Our Loss." And basically it talks about, look, all of these Jewish conservatives, people like Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, Laura Loomer, they are pieces of SHIT, and they can go get the F out of here and move to Israel if they think Israel is so wonderful. That's basically what he says. And as offensive as that is, you need to watch this. You need to listen to this. And you need to be aware of what is happening right now, what's going across the feed of young people on these devices, so you are not caught unaware or uninformed. And if necessary, if you're a Messianic Jewish congregational leader or rabbi, say, hey, I know this is offensive, but this is the kind of smut, this is the kind of anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish propaganda which is now circulating today in the United States of America. What do we do about it? Obviously, we pray, but also we have to change to a different style of spirituality. I encourage you, do take a good look at this, because what's going to happen, and I'm just going to call it now, U.S. support for Israel is going to become an endangered species in my lifetime. I believe that is guaranteed. I do not think that 10 or 20 years from now, it's going to at all be what it has been. It's going to be completely different. We don't know what the next 3 years of the Trump administration is going to bring, but this rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and anti-Judaism from the conservative right, very disturbing. It's very angering. And yeah, we just need to continue to pray for God's supernatural protection and provision for all of our efforts. We really do need to do that, because it is not business as usual anymore. And hopefully what just took place in New York City, hopefully when you see some of these things circulate more frequently, and as we continue to sort through the fallout of October the 7th, 2023 and the Israel-Gaza war, we can be ready and not be caught off guard when the next major drama hits. And that's why we've gone 5 times a week now with Messianic Insider addressing the current events, because I realize that not enough people are discussing these things. Well, we can change them theologically. That season is broadly over. I'm sorry. That was for the 2000s and the 2010s. When we hit the 2020s, things really started to change. And now we really have some strong tactile evidence that we can't go back to the way things were. We're not going to go back. All right, so that concludes our news roundup. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a wide array of free articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can take a look at some back issues of Outreach Israel News, look up some back episodes, Messianic Insider, McKee Moment Shorts, etc., and generally take a look at our various ministry adventures over the years. And if you have not already, please do give a thumbs up or a heart to this live stream, which will help give us greater exposure on the different social media platforms. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, May God bless you. Shalom, and take care.